Hello and welcome to the project section. So let's create a database class with OOPS concepts that we have learned, and we'll try to wrap our database transactions with a database class. This will be generic library. I can promise you can use this library in any of your projects, and it will be very generic. It's very simple to use, and you can actually just create within like 5 to 10 minutes, and for all your projects this will be your reference library. It's so simple to use OOPS concept, and it will really show you what is the benefit of OOPS. You might be writing procedural language from so many years, and how much reusability have you done, right? Now with this just simple project, right, of using a database class, you can see the power of database class. We'll actually write it and reuse it. Then you'll see within just few lines of code, you will see the real benefit of using the OOPS. Okay, I'll emphasize again and again the reusability portion. That's where your whole knowledge of OOPS come in picture. You have spent so much time learning OOPS. Now it's a time to see how the OOPS will benefit you in your programming and how it will help you to do reusability. Okay, so let's start our project now. So let's do a simple project of wrapping all the database operation into one class. So for that, we have to create a database first, then we'll create some tables, we'll create some fields, and we'll write the database class. Okay, so I hope you have installed AMPS and AMPS is working on your machine. So go to PHP MyAdmin, type localhost AMPS, go to PHP MyAdmin. You have to just say localhost PHP MyAdmin, and you will be landing onto the PHP MyAdmin. So let's create a database first. Okay, the database name is db_oops. Okay, and I'm going to create this database. Okay, your database is created. Okay, you can go ahead and create a table. So let's create a table. We create a test table with, let's say, just create 2 columns. Okay, I'm creating the table OOP test. I have clicked on to this database. When you click only, you can see this page. Okay, if you are somewhere on the other database, or you're clicking on somewhere on the home page, you will not be able to see what the screen I'm seeing. The only thing that you can do is when you click on your database, okay, you will be landing up here. Okay, so you haven't created a table. Let's create that table. Table OOP test, and we'll create 2 columns in it. Let's go. So it has loaded the table. Let's create the fields, and when you save, the table will be created. Okay, so the first one is ID and second one is the name. Okay, the name you want to varchar of, let's say, 100. Okay, and you can just save it now. Okay, so the table has been created. You can see the table here. When you clear the table also here, this is the database, this is the table. Okay, and if you want to insert, you can go ahead and insert some records here. Okay, so let's insert some records, 1 and 2, and then say this is the first record, and you can say this is the second record. Okay, and then you can click on go. So when you click on go, these values will be inserted in this field names. Okay, and to how to browse, you can click on the table name and you can see the records here. First record, second record with ID 1 and 2. Okay, so let's now write a class, database class, to access these records, and we'll try to write a database class in such a manner that all the upcoming projects should also able to use it. So I'm giving you a library here, a concept here, which you can use it and apply for all your PDO database. We'll use PDO to connect to this database, and we'll reuse all the OOPS concept that you have learned. Well, this project is not much about how to connect to database and all those things. You should have this knowledge previously. It's much about how do you apply the OOPS concept and convert your actual procedural code into an OOPS code. So that's the lecture on how to create the table and the database. So we have created a db_OOP database, and we have created table_OOP_test. So that's all for this lecture on how to create the database and the tables for the database class, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to the lecture on configuration. So let's create our project here now. So let's create a folder 21. So I'm going to say database. Okay, that's our project. Okay, the first thing you will do in any project is basically create the configuration. So you will create a config folder, and inside the config folder you will create a config.php file. If you have worked with MySQL previously, then you know this concept. You define constants and you can assign the value there. Okay, so let's do that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to save my database details inside the configuration file. Okay, so let's do that. So let's define the constants. So the first constant is db host. Okay, it's deciding on my local host, so I'm using local host. If the database is sitting somewhere in your remote location, then provide that IP address of that location. If you have a host name, provide the host name. Okay, so next is db host. That's the name of a server where your database is installed. Then you have user. Okay, this is the root. I'll show you how I'm getting all these details anyway. Then the password for my database is password pwd. Okay, and the name of the database. What is the name of the database? This is db_oop is the database name. Okay, so one thing that you might be confused how I'm getting the root and the password. If you are new to PHP admin and you don't know how to get it, you can go to your PHP MyAdmin. You can go to users and you can see your root users here. So this have all the privileges. So this user have all the privileges, and that's the user I'm gonna using. And how did I got my password? It's very simple. Go to the amps folder, go to PHP admin, and you can see config inc.php. Okay, why are we opening from the amps PHP MyAdmin? Because PHP MyAdmin is able to connect to a database, right? So we'll see what has been configured here to find the password. Okay, so the password is here, right? If you are not able to find, type password and find it. It is trying to open up a file and getting that password. So let's open that file. So it's amps data and my.config. So you have to go one level back, that is ... Okay, then saying amps is the folder, then saying data, that is the folder, right? And it has my.config. So if you open this file, it's the password. So this is the password of your amps. Okay, and that is the same password I'm using it here. Okay, so it's simple to find your password of your MySQL. If you have installed amps, go to PHP MyAdmin, go open this config inc.php file. Okay, once you open it, you have your password here. It's loading up from this file, and if you open this file, you can find your password. Okay, and how did you find the database name? That is nothing but the database we just created. Okay, make sure you have root. If you are using any other user, make sure that user has privilege to access this database. Okay, because we are using root, the root already have all the privileges to access all the database and tables inside this MySQL. Okay, so your configuration is ready. So let's see how we did the configuration. If you go to www oops database and config, so there's a folder called config, and under config we have config.php, which has defined some constants. So when we write a database class, we will use these constants. So that's our configuration, and next lecture we're gonna start doing the database class. Welcome to the lecture. So let's do the database class. Go back to database folder and we'll create a class called database. Okay, one class, one responsibility, and when you define a database with its file name, and make sure the class name also is database with D caps. Okay, so first thing we have to do is we have to do require once, and we have to embed the config .php. So let's define these variables. Private, so we have this config file. So just to avoid the spelling mistake, so we will use this variables now. So we have our private properties of the database. Let's create some more properties. This is to hold our connection, then to hold the errors, then to hold the statements, then to hold the DB connected or not as a true or false. So we'll say it's not connected as of now. Okay, so we have our properties created. Let's create the methods now. Okay, so first we will create the constructor. And we'll also have methods like get error, and because we have defined our property as private, so we have to return this. Okay, so we'll say return the error. Okay, so just by checking the error you can know whether is there any error in the connection or not, and we'll store all our errors here. Okay, next we'll say is connected, right, and this will pass our DB connected. This is a boolean variable, so it will tell you whether it is connected or not. So this is not a method, this is a property. Okay, so we have get error is connected. Okay, then we'll also define our query. Okay, and we'll say query, and you have to pass the query. This is query, basically the select query. Okay, and where do you want to execute this query? This is a prepared statement, so let's save our statement. So we have to create our statement, and we'll say this, and hoping you have already connected. So you have your connection, and then you say prepare statements, and then you pass the query. Okay, as simple as that. This is basically the line that you typically write when you get the statement. You use your active connection, call a method called prepare, you pass the prepared statement. Prepared statements are identifiers which you have to bind it later into the statements. Okay, so we're going to look into all those things. So this function is called as prepare statements with query, right? Let's have another function. We're just trying to bind our methods and statement that we use to connect to PDO into some methods, right? Let's say you want to execute the statements, then you create a execute method, and then we'll pass the statement of execute. Okay, we don't have to worry about passing the statements here, because once your statement is stored here, you can access it and then you execute it. Okay, and if you see here, I'm not trying to do everything in one shot. I'm trying to keep as functions so that I can reuse them. So whenever I want to execute the statement, I just call this execute method, then it will execute the statement, and statement is set previously with the query. So when we define it, we have to define by passing a query, then run this execute method to execute that query. Okay, so just imagine how you're trying to do the formula here. You're trying to store everything in the statement property, and then calling the method when you actually want to do the transaction. Okay, so this is execute the prepared statement. Okay, now you get the result set, right, as an array of objects, right? So let's define a function for it. we'll say result set. Okay, in this we have to call the execute method, right? Once you execute, then you get the result set. So we're gonna execute this, right? After you execute it, your statements will have the result set, right? So we can say this dot statement, you can say fetch all, fetch objects. Okay, so you're not doing anything, you are just trying to execute this statement. You can actually put this statement here, right? You can always put the statement and do it, but I don't want to do that. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to separate out my code in functions so that I can reuse it. So if any other methods want to execute, I just call it this execute method. If I want to execute from the class that is using this, I can do that. Okay, that's why I'm not hard coding or calling it from the result set or the query. I'm putting it a separate execute. So when I pass a query, I have the ability to choose when to execute it. Okay, so now you have the result set. So you have to call this in a sequence, obviously, because first you have to do is the query, then you have to call the result set. You don't have to call the execute now, because a result set already calling the execute, it's fetching the data and sending the array back to the method that is calling this. Okay, and we will write some general methods just to get the row count. Get record row count. Let's write a simple function for it. Row count. Okay, see how I'm wrapping the whole SQL statements. Okay, that's the most important thing you should be looking at here. Okay, this should help you to think through, oh, this is how I have to wrap my code, right? And now you have a row count. Okay, it's all trying to use the properties, right? If you notice it properly, I'm not defining and redefining all my code. I'm using the statement property, and all the method that is there I'm wrapping around a method, so that I don't have to really remember what's going on. I just pass the query once, then I have the ability to count it also. I just pass the query and say give me the row count, it will give you the row count. Okay, then when you want to get a single object, right, get single record as object. Okay, then you do a public function. Okay, you say I want a single record. Okay, and you have to execute the statement first. It's like a result set. Result set give you an array, but this method I want to fetch not all, I want to fetch the first record, right? So when you write fetch, fetch will fetch one record, right? And I have to say PDO fetch object. So in a case when I'm passing the query as get me this where ID is equal to 1, then I want to just fetch the first record, right? I know it's going to be one record, I just want to fetch the one record, and that's how you can do this. Okay, the next one, we have to have the binding value, because we have statements, right? Prepared statements have identifiers, then you have to find a way to bind them. Okay, so let's write a function for it, and we'll say bind. Bind basically have the parameter and parameter value and what is the type of it. Okay, so parameter and type, it's a value, then you have type. Okay, so by default you can say it's null. Okay, and what I'm really trying to do here is I'm trying to call the bind value. This is the method of statement, and I'm trying to bind the value. If you're saying, let's say delete something from a table where ID is equal to this, and this is basically a value that you have to bind to the prepared statement. Okay, if you have worked with prepared statement before, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, and this type, sometimes if you haven't sent anything, so let's write a switch statement. Let's say you haven't sent a type and you don't know what is a type is. Okay, so you can check this value and decide the type as well. Okay, so if you say is null, and you are saying if we haven't passed the type, so let me choose the type. Okay, so let's do a switch statement for it. Okay, and let's check whether it is integer. Okay, if value is integer, so what is the type of when the value is integer? When the type will become PDO param int. Okay, and then you break from the switch statement. Okay, similarly you can do it for boolean, then if it's null, then null. Let's say is boolean, if it is null, and then you have a default case as well, right? So default, what you want to do is you want to put as a string param str, and null is null, and this is bool. Okay, nothing fancy here. Okay, we're just deciding the type. If you don't pass the type, then it will decide by itself. Okay, this is basically when you want to bind parameters. This is the binding of the parameter to your statement. Okay, so this is a very simple class that you have written. Okay, you are wrapping your SQL statements into methods. Okay, I have created a bind method which you pass parameter, value, and type you choose whatever type it is based on is int, bool, or null, and then you call this bind value method from the statement and you bind the value. Then we have single, which will execute the statement and fetch one record. Row count will call the method row count, as simple as that. Result set will fetch all, and then you have to execute it first to fetch the records. Then execute will basically execute, and then query will do the prepare statement ready with the query. So for query is basically the first time you pass the query, select asterisk from this table, then you execute it, right? When you execute, you can choose to have result set or single or row count. This will all tell you what is the value that's basically from that statement. Is connected will tell you whether its connection is successful. Get error will show you the errors. Okay, so now let's open up the connection. Your database is ready. Okay, so let's do the opening of the connection with our database. Okay, there's nothing fancy also. So let's set the PDO connection. Okay, we will say the DNS. The data source is, you say MySQL :host equal to $this of host. Then you have DB name equal to this dot DB name, right? And that's all you need. Okay, then you have your options, how you want to connect to your database. You can create an array of it and pass all the values of your parameters. Okay, I want to have PDO attribute persistence, that's equal to true. Then PDO attr error mode PDO mode underscore exception. Okay, so that's our options. Let's try to open the connection now. Try catch PDO exception. Okay, what you will do, you will try to store the error in the error message. Error is equal to $E get message, and we'll add an end line to it. Okay, now we'll try to open up the connection here. So $this connection, the connection is here. Okay, new PDO connection. So you have to pass your data source, that's the connection string. Then you have to pass your user, this is all coming up from the configuration file. then the password, then the options. Right, as simple as that. There's nothing fancy here. You're just trying to open up the connection with some options. You have your connection string, you have your user, you have your password, and you have your option. So let's try to see if any errors are there. Okay, and then we'll try to enhance this further. Okay, so we go to this folder. Okay, and we'll run our database PHP. So we have our missing colon somewhere. That's on line 24. Okay, so we have our colon here, colon here. Okay, 77. Okay, so it's clean now. Okay, so we have done our database class. Okay, this is wrapping of your database procedural code into a class. Okay, that's what we have learned here. So first thing, we have imported the config.php so that we get access to this constants. We have created some of the private properties. Constructor, we are trying to open up the connection with the database using PDO, and then we are capturing the error, and also we can say the DB connected is true. $this DB connected is true. Okay, and if you are following up here, then you are saying it's false. It's false anyway, but you're saying false here, so you know whether it's connected or not. Okay, so your connection has been done. Then you are getting the error, checking whether it is connected. You have a query, you are preparing the statement, then you execute the statement, then you are fetching the details, all the records, doing a row count, fetching one record, then you are binding the parameter with a value and passing the type to it. Okay, nothing fancy, is very simple, just few lines of statements. You have wrapped it with an method, and then you have created a class out of it, and then you also define some of the properties. So this is what we have learned so far in the OOPs: how to create a class, how to create properties, how to create methods, how to create constructors, and how to return some values from a method, how to pass parameters to a method, and then now we'll create an instance and then try to do some testing on it. Okay, so that's all in this lecture on how to create the database class. In the next lecture, we'll try to run some test cases using this database.php. Okay, so I'll see you in the next lecture now. Hello and welcome to the lecture on doing the database testing. So all the heavy work has already been done, right? We have done our database class, and I can promise you, you can use this class in any of your projects. And I'll show you the power of OOPs now. Now just you have wrapped some of your database statements into a method. You might be thinking, oh, this is just wrapping the methods, but I'll show you the power of OOPs now. Okay, let's do a test with just simple line of reusable code. You will see the power of OOPs now. Okay, so let's do a testing now. So you can say database test.php. Now we'll try to use our database class. Okay, so remember that your database is OOPs. Your table is table OOPs test, which has ID and name. This is the first record, this is the second record. Okay, so let's try to use the database class. So you'll say require once database.php. Okay, and you can do this step for all your projects. You just have to have a database.php installed and you're ready to go. Okay, the first thing you have to say is database new database. Okay, you don't have to pass anything as a parameter. Okay, and what you're gonna get, you can check whether the connection is successful or not. So what you can do, okay, db, tell me it's connected or not. Okay, and if it's connected, you say db is connected. Okay, if it is not connected, you say db not connected. Okay, and we're gonna play around with this now. Okay, let's execute this two statement to understand whether the connection has been done or not. So let's verify with this method it is, I believe it's called as is connected. So let's go and say is connected. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, db connected. Okay, to check whether it is really connected, open your config.php. If you remember config, we have created config.php, and try to change 1 to your password, and you can say db is not connected. Okay, so simple, right? It's just so simple. You just now know with just one statement whether database is connected or not. Okay, and you just change the config. Okay, okay, you can see the database is connected. Now what is the next step? And you want to say if the database is not connected, just exit the program, right? Because no use that event is not connected. Okay, you want to echo the error, right? You remember we had an error. Now it will have an error, right? So we say get error, because try catch, we are catching the error, and then you can die the program now. Right, you can say unable to connect to db, right? So simple. Now you can even have access to the error. Okay, you can able to see error when the connection is failed, so we'll add 1 here, and now you can see the error as well, right? Access is denied and you are unable to connect, and the program will exit now, right? So let's change this back. You are connected, right? Now you are connected, so you are safe to execute the commands here. So the first thing you want to do is you have to pass the query. You remember how we did? We created a query, right? The first thing, the step 1 is to create this query so that it can do the prepare statement. Okay, so the query is select asterisk from table OOP underscore test, right? As simple as that. What will be the next step? Okay, you just var dump your result set, that's all. So you say result set. Okay, and remember result set basically is executing as well, right? It's executing the statement and then it will convert into an array and give it to you. So if you look at result set, you're executing and you're fetching. Okay, 2 things in one task, and you're actually having an array here. So if you look at your PHP MyAdmin, you have 2 records here, and if you run this, you can see the 2 records here. Okay, so simple, right? You just 1 line of code, you can actually connect to a database. With this you have connected to database, with this you have set your query, and with this you have executed your result set as well. Okay, and if you want to count the number of rows in the database, how you do it? You remember we write a method for it, and we say give me the row, right? Give me the row count. Okay, so if you just say row count, you can see number of rows is 2. Okay, if you add 1 more here, say 3, this is the 3rd record, and you say go, and you run your program, you get the 3 rows, right? And the 3rd row is here, and you haven't written any code, right? This is the power of PHP. You already wrote all the library that's required to wrap around your methods. Now you're just playing around with it, right? You don't have to remember about the procedural code, where is my table and all those things. You're just passing a query, fetching the result set, right? It's already an array. Okay, and then you can print the number of rows out of it. Let's say you want to fetch single row. What are you going to do? Just a single, that's all. That's all you have to do it, and you can fetch just 1 record, right? That's the first record. What if you want to fetch the single record where the ID is equal to number 3, right? But remember, this is a prepared statement, so you have to pass the identifier here, right? And you have to replace this. And how did we write to replace this? You remember we have written a bind function, right? Let's bind it. So we say db please bind my variable, right? Bind my variable, and I'm not telling which statement, what query, everything is taken care by your class. and it's taken care by your instance. Your instance is holding all your details connected to your database. It has your query information, it has your row information, it has the array of result set, it has everything stored it in the properties. Okay, so how you do a binding? You just have to say, okay, for ID you bind row number 2 because you bind one row to it. So I'm saying just show me that single row. Okay, so you are seeing the second row, and if you say number 3, then you can see the number 3 row. If you say number 1, then you can see the first row. Okay, so simple, right? We have done very complex coding into a simple coding, and remember, you can actually use this. And here we haven't defined any database, any table, right? It's just coming up from the configuration file. This is just a wrapper. This is just basically a utility that does the wrapping of your database code into a methods. And now just by calling these methods, you are really enjoying the power of OOPs. Okay, in procedural you basically write so much of code and then you enhance it part of your logic. Right here you are writing an utility, a database class which is able to do all the database activity, and it doesn't know what are the parameters. Its parameters pulling out from a configuration file and also pulling out and whatever input you're giving to that class via your object. Okay, and you are able to get the connection, check whether connected or not. You're able to execute your select query, you're able to fetch the records, you're able to count, you're able to get the first record, you're able to even do a select query based on your ID, and you're able to bind, and you're able to get that single record. Just in 5 minutes you are able to do so much of work with MySQL, and just with a simple line of codes by writing a class. Okay, so this is the example on how to create a database class and connect it, and how do you wrap your code of the database. That's the whole intention of writing OOPs. Well, that's the example of how you can wrap your database. Next we will try to do the select, insert, update and delete operation on one more table. Okay, and we'll try to reuse all these features that we have developed here, and within the 5 to 10 minutes you should be able to have those CRUD operations ready for any classes. Okay, so next let's look into that project. So that's all for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.